Bro, if I asked you before Elbaf what Zoro needed to do to become the world's greatest swordsman, almost everyone would have given the exact same answer. Defeat Mihawk. It was that simple. For over 25 years, that's how we've understood Zoro's dream. But honestly, after Elbaf, I am not so sure anymore, because I genuinely think Oda has written himself into a corner. He has created a dilemma nobody saw coming. What if there's a character that is stronger than Mihawk as a swordsman, and by extension Zoro, because Saint Nerona Imu has just revealed to be a swordsman, a guy who fights using 19 blades of his choosing. It is undeniable that Imu is a swordsman, and that's where the problem begins. If the final villain of One Piece is also a swordsman, then what exactly does it mean to become the world's greatest swordsman? If Imu is stronger than Mihawk in a sword duel, then defeating Mihawk wouldn't prove that Zoro is the world's greatest swordsman. But if Mihawk is actually stronger than Imu, despite Imu being the final villain, that raises a completely set of different questions, which is why I call it the Zoro dilemma. Why doesn't Mihawk just defeat the final villain himself? Why is it Luffy or Blackbeard or Dragon or Shanks? Why not just be Mihawk? And if Imu does lose a sword duel to Zoro, does that mean Zoro should be the one fighting the final boss instead of Luffy? If Imu is weaker than Mihawk in swordsmanship but stronger overall because of other abilities, then what exactly does World's Greatest Swordsman exactly measure? Does the title only compare pure sword skill or overall combat ability? Which goes back to the whole Shanks versus Mihawk thing. Even if Zoro never fights Imu, that's still a problem, because if Imu is truly stronger than Mihawk in swordsmanship and then Zoro defeats Mihawk, it no longer feels like a definitive conclusion to Zoro's journey. Instead of readers celebrating Zoro achieving his dream, the only thing you will be thinking is, but could Zoro defeat Imu in a swords duel? Maybe he's not the world's greatest swordsman, and that alone undermines the emotional payoff Oda has spent decades constructing. On the other hand, if Mihawk is still genuinely the superior swordsman to Imu, then Oda is left with an equally difficult question. Why not just have Mihawk defeat Imu? Again, this is the dilemma. No matter what way you go, you are left with many questions. Why is the pinnacle of swordsmanship seemingly beneath the final antagonist in the story power hierarchy? Suddenly, the title of World's Greatest Swordsman no longer feels like an absolute measure of superiority, but a title with unclear boundaries that forces readers to ask what it actually represents. Is it overall strength, pure swordsmanship, haki, maybe public recognition, or something else entirely? A title that used to be so simple as just defeating Mihawk now has completely different qualifications and explanations, and that's why Imu's reveal is such a problem if he is a swordsman. However, there's another way to look at this, and honestly, it might make Zoro's dream even more satisfying. Maybe Oda has intentionally created this dilemma and uncertainty so that defeating Mihawk is not the end of Zoro's journey, but rather the beginning of his final test. Mihawk has always been the man standing at the pinnacle of swordsmanship, but perhaps the Final Saga would ask an even greater question. Can the world's greatest swordsman, Zoro, overcome the greatest threat the world has ever known, Imu? In that scenario, defeating Mihawk would still fulfill Zoro's promise to Kuina by earning him that title, while facing Imu would become the ultimate opportunity to prove that the title of world's greatest swordsman only belongs to Zoro and not Imu. Instead of replacing Mihawk's importance, Imu would reinforce it. Zoro wouldn't just inherit the title, he would validate it against the strongest enemy in history. If that's the direction Oda is taking, then what initially looks like a problem could actually elevate Zoro's dream to a level none of us expected. At the end of the day, I'm not saying Oda has ruined Zoro's dream, far from it, but I do think Imu's reveal has introduced a question that didn't exist before. Maybe Oda has written himself into a dilemma, or maybe he's setting up the greatest test of Zoro's ambition we have ever seen. Either way, one thing is certain, the world's greatest swordsman means more today than it ever did before. But what do you think? Definitely comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, definitely check out debunking the worst Blackbeard myth. And massive thank you to my members, Cats Aimer Family, Uso Timor, and Mr. Bushido 56, and I will see you there.